Looming over the York Lane is the towering, half-constructed remains of Deadlock's version of the Brooklyn Bridge. One of the most visible and quintessentially New York structures, the bridge is visible from almost every angle on the map, yet so much of its detail is actually out of bounds. This is a framing device. It's something that exists to enhance the world around it without playing much of a role at all in the game. Except, you may not have noticed that the diagonal stairs on York actually go inside the support beam for the bridge as it's so tall. Or that this beam is the only thing holding the entire structure up, as the other one is more than a little bit detached from the ground, floating above the water like this. Of course, you weren't meant to notice any of this, because it's out of bounds. You're supposed to be focused on winning your lane, not staring at the scenery. Unless Lash just ulted you from outer space, then you've got plenty of time to admire the view. Something highly unusual about Deadlock's bridge is where the cables go. The Brooklyn Bridge is a suspension bridge, meaning an array of taut cables keep it, well, suspended. But one illusion Valve isn't hiding well at all is how these cables are anchored in this roof here. Hardly a stable surface for your massive bridge, and also something you can notice quite easily by just playing the game. If you take a moment to look at it, it makes the bridge's inclusion seem kinda laughable because it doesn't really add up at all, yet it fits Deadlock's hodgepodge nature so well. The game has essentially been cobbled together from so many missing pieces, from different backgrounds, using different assets and resorting to old scrapped features to create something new, that having this bridge not really make a lot of sense makes a lot of sense. If you use NoClip, you can get up onto the rooftop, where I discovered the cables can be climbed with a little bit of skill. Unfortunately, as I have none, it took a few tries to get across to the wooden boards, where I was pleasantly surprised to find actual collision. Bear in mind you're not supposed to be up here. There's a ceiling that's meant to stop you from going this far. This is quite unusual for most games, as adding collision is generally an extra step in making a world. Why bother making collision when no one's going to be able to go there? This is something we'll return to later, but for now let's take a look at this very rare vista. The view from the bridge is really quite phenomenal. You can even see the crease in the skybox where the texture loops back in on itself, which is very indicative of just how old the Source engine really is. Valve put a lot of effort into making the city beautiful, and there are so few tall vantage points where you can get a real bird's eye view of the work they put in. But when we turn the other way, we get met with the opposite. The granular, magnificent detail is gone, and the wide open sea and half-constructed bridge are all that remain. As the bridge tapers off into the distance, its construction starts making even less sense. But it's where the floating cables lead that most intrigues me. In the middle of the sea is a building, floating ominously above the water's surface, just sitting there, menacingly. The bridge cables ending up in a building was not intentional, but clearly something that was forced upon the level designers through sheer force of level logistics. This, however, well, this just seems to be an error with no explanation. There's a magic word I've avoided using on my channel so far, and that's because it's horribly overused in videos like this, but the best way I can describe it is liminal. I don't invoke this word lightly either. The Source engine has been a playground for all sorts of creations going on nearly 30 years now, and in that time, a certain community has built up around weird Garry's Mod maps. Something about the way the engine works lends itself to creating very odd and unsettling places, and this looks like something you might find while diving through a random trove of game files, except it's right here, in Deadlock, and you never noticed it. But why? Well, there are a couple of reasons why the building might be here. The simplest is that it was placed down by mistake and never removed. The second is that it was supposed to go somewhere and they just forgot to place it or ran out of room. Or maybe, just maybe, it's supposed to be there. You can actually see this building from a couple of vantage points in York, but you need to be really looking for it from a high vantage point to notice it at all. There's a distinct lack of detailing to it, with no doors, no visible points of entry, as if it was supposed to never actually be interacted with and was meant to be a detail just kind of sitting in the background. It's admittedly quite beautiful in a vaguely unsettling way. We can find a close match for it inside the playable area, as the radio station building shares the same gable design, with a few minor differences, notably that they're missing from one side. Was this an old version of the radio station that was swapped out and then never removed by mistake? Could it be left over from the old Streets map? I know I alluded to it, but I actually find it very hard to believe that this was placed intentionally as part of the vista, even if you can see it from inside the game's boundaries. York is absolutely spoiled for choice with interesting out-of-bounds details like this. Something you can't really appreciate from ground level is the sheer immensity of the shipyard and the boat docked there, or the towering smokestacks that crown the industrial environment in a smoky haze. They're both pretty well detailed too, and the ship has a lot of things modelled that essentially aren't visible to anyone ever, but someone at Valve knew that from certain angles it had to look convincing. From certain rooftops you would be able to see on top of it, and so it had to look slightly functional. The last of these out-of-bounds features is the most famous in real life, but probably one of the least appreciated in Deadlock. Just over the horizon stands a low poly model of the Statue of Liberty. I'm kind of glad that someone decided that this had to be here, even if only 3 Grey Talon enjoyers might ever really see it. However, you wretched flightless creatures can still glimpse it for a moment yourself when taking the yellow zipline from the Hidden King's base, where its low poly glory doesn't matter silhouetted against the sunset. Interestingly, despite the level of detail, the island is remarkably similar to its real-life counterpart, including buildings and both piers. It is, however, facing the wrong way, but that really feels like an artistic decision that we can kind of forgive them for. If you want to learn more about it, you should read this incredible Steam post by Silver Shroud, who goes into great detail about the buildings in Deadlock's map, both removed and currently visible, and how they relate to the real-life New York City. So I highly recommend reading it. Something I hinted at earlier with the bridge, but something that has nonetheless surprised me, is just how much collision there is on every building in the map. This might seem irrelevant at first, but consider that in most games, if you go out of bounds, you'll just tend to clip through everything. Not so in Deadlock. Normally, there's a ceiling that prevents you from doing this, but by clipping through it and then disabling no clip, you can walk on the upper side of it, where the Cursed Apple's rooftops provide a whole new concrete playground. You can climb both the Hidden King and Archmother bases, where you get a unique perspective on how the two rival deities stare each other down from across the city. A video I saw recently went over the dramaturgy of Deadlock, and it's really worth a watch too. But something I could never appreciate before was just how much this is reflected in each side of the map. The Hidden King's side is this very industrial, work, factory-related layout. It's full of these kind of red brick buildings and old sort of industrial features, whereas the Archmother's side is all of this gleaming white stone and all of these big ornate buildings. And you do get a sense of it from the ground level, but there's something about seeing it from up high beyond where you're supposed to be going that really just indicates this difference between these two gods, the chaos and the order meeting in the middle. These are not the only places you can go, of course. Every other rooftop can also be climbed, and each one leads to a new perspective of the city. Something I hadn't noticed before was that every rooftop with spikes on it can be walked on without clipping up there, but the antennae on the roof will zap you for being up there, so do watch out. There are 2 antennae in the large buildings on Broadway, obscured within the towers, so if you died up there, well, that's probably why. This is a really odd choice for Valve to do, because there's no real reason for them to be like this. They could have just moved the invisible ceiling slightly lower so you can't get onto these buildings, or made the buildings slightly taller so that you hit the ceiling before getting onto them. But I do really appreciate the visual language with all the spikes around the outside. It just communicates something to the player, like, you can get up here, but really, we don't want you to be. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop feels quite refreshing too. Once you're out of the playable space, Valve don't really bother putting invisible walls in places that you can't go, so with the right movement, you're able to soar across the Cursed Apple's skyline and investigate so many nooks and crannies like the scaffolding on the bank building, which, once again, is totally walkable. If you're curious about how to tell if a surface has collision, a good rule of thumb is that if you can place a poster on it, you can walk on it too. So, that's what I did. I'm going to enjoy a very long stay in the Baroness for this one. Speaking of, going directly underneath the actual Baroness hotel, you end up not far away from the Baroness hall that the Doorman's Hotel Guest Ultimate sends you to, and has done many more times if you're a degenerate and max out Doorman's ult to send someone there every 10 seconds.
Your stay will be unforgettable.
But, that's beside the point. It's a very common tactic by games to keep separate cells under the map like this. It saves a lot on loading, and it can be a great place to store NPCs when you don't need them. Just like how I store my enemies when I don't need them.
The Baroness is always looking for new guests.
The ambience here when not enjoying a Jet 2 holiday is very peculiar. It's a surprisingly quiet space. I'm not sure what I expected though. Some music, some wind, some laughter. When you remove the frantic need to check out and avoid a fee, there's essentially no soundscape, just the illusion of a swirling blue void. You feel truly alone down here. I think I would like to check out now, Doorman. Doorman? Doorman? Please? Not far from the hotel is the subway, which is normally only accessible to small characters, except for one side that is completely blocked off by this grate. I wish it offered more though. There's very little to actually see down here other than collision once again being present, so if you could get down here, you could walk around just fine. What the subway does highlight though is how everything is so connected. You probably have an idea of how to get around the map, but if you fly inside a large building or underneath the map, the full complexity of all the intertwining pathways is on display. We all build up this sense of familiarity with the spaces that we're in, but I bet your mental map is not nearly as complicated as what the reality actually is. See how layered the tunnels are, how they twist and overlap one another, each leading to very different portions of an otherwise quite small space. It's a level of care required when your game has to maximize one map. I know people call Dota's map the perfect map, but it can't do this level of 3D stacking the way that Deadlock can do. So I think in a way Valve have kind of one-upped themselves here. If your head is spinning from being lost in tunnels, then come with me. Let's turn our attention to the green lane. The park side of the Cursed Apple doesn't have quite as much going for it as York does, but it's nonetheless quite beautiful. The central arch offers great framing for shots you normally can't get, and the less detailed textures don't matter, because Deadlock's art style doesn't require loads of fidelity. One obvious thing about the bushes beyond this gate is how low poly they are, but it's something that's not particularly obscured from us. It reminds me of older games that needed to present the idea of a much larger world being beyond the boundaries of the playable space, but they didn't have the means to render it. So many assets that didn't need to be in detail would essentially be just flat textures or very, very crudely modelled impressions of a shape. you can sell the illusion at a fraction of the budget. Except these tree blobs aren't actually flat textures, they have tiny little leaf patterns that reflect the light, which is something that you almost can't see from inside the boundary even if you tried. I love people who design these obscure little details because, like, why would anyone playing the game appreciate it ever? Who's going to see it? Us detail freaks. That's who. But there's far more to Deadlock than just its main map. There's the testing map, which, sadly, has very little of interest to see, other than the creep spawners being two differently aligned hidden kings shoved into a tiny box. But then, there's the hideout. The hideout itself is rammed full of detail, most of which we're unfortunately going to have to brush over today, but I'm more interested in the places that you can't normally go. Believe me, there are many. The hideout has many blocked off doors that give the impression that it's larger than it actually is, but this just isn't really true. Or is it? Most of these lead nowhere, but perhaps more surprisingly, some of them do lead somewhere. When you load in, you will face the windows, but turning to look behind, there is a door to the lift. This lift shaft isn't empty either. It's modelled to a degree and even includes two ornate chains for lifting up a lift that doesn't appear to be attached anywhere. We can also see down the shaft, where the Baroness Hall is waiting on the map, in case you enjoyed your stay so much that you want to go back. Weirdly, there's no way of actually seeing this lift chamber in the game. It's not accessible through a side passage or visible through a window, so I wonder what Valve was cooking when they scrapped it. Similarly, there's another door around the corner in the shop that actually leads somewhere, but can't be opened. If we clip through, we can see a cramped storage closet with a pile of crates, a desk, a plant, and a map of the real Manhattan. You can actually glimpse this one on the way to Rem's hideout, but the shutters make it incredibly difficult to see any of the detail. So the fact that they bothered to even model this space feels really kind of special. It's like an Easter egg hidden inside an Easter egg, one that you have to literally break the game to even know is there. The room doesn't have any function, but it feels very Deadlock. I can imagine a designer sitting in this room constantly revising Citadel into Neon Prime, into Deadlock, becoming more and more exasperated over the years and letting the junk just pile up around them. But the main feature of the hideout is what we can't reach inside. The massive layout of New York is begging to be explored, and what we find when we leave the hideout is that it's actually floating in mid-air. Even the buildings that frame our view aren't attached properly, and here we see more examples of how assets are reused and reoriented at different angles to create the illusion of variation. This is something that the hideout exterior does quite a lot, reusing and combining buildings to make new ones. It's a clever trick, and one that I can actually personally appreciate. I know this sounds meaningless in the context of Deadlock, but I used to make a lot of maps for a Dawn of War 2 mod. And one thing that I would often do is combine objects to give the impression of something new. It's very good for creating some new details that you can't otherwise see elsewhere whilst using existing assets. It's a neat trick that 99% of people won't notice. There are quite a lot of buildings here that we can't see in the main map. Most notably the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the Flatiron, and whatever this goofy art tower is. The attention put into these headline structures is really quite interesting. Like the Chrysler Building, for example, has these little sort of ornate bird details on the side of it that, from our normal perspective, we basically can't really make out at all. But if we fly up to them ourselves in ways that we're not supposed to, they're actually quite well detailed. It's another incidental detail that we didn't really need to get, but someone at Valve really wanted a few people to see this, and I appreciate that someone thought about it in that way. Many of the smaller buildings we can see are very detailed too, and I feel almost like they missed a trick by not putting them in the main map backdrop. But then again, it's good to have variation between the two places. It makes the hideout feel like a separate, safer location. However, for whatever reason, A lot of the buildings have detailing faced away from our normal point of view, implying that they didn't look quite right when placed at the intended angle. This scaffolding, for example, is oriented in a way so that we can't see it. And there might be a reason for it, as the roof texture above it is misaligned and mangled, showing what is supposed to be a vertical windowed texture instead. We can also get closer to the odd occult symbols out here too, and it just confirms that most of them are simply floating in the sky, with no attempt for them to be attached to anything or make any particular sense. It doesn't really matter though, because they had this very weird factor the devs were going for, a sense of the other. What difference does it make if some of them are flying? I mean, New York kind of has weirder things going on in it already. The Hideout's great windows were clearly designed in a way that we could see a vertical slice of the city. Looking down, we can see some car lights. Obviously, we know this is an illusion, but going nearer reveals just how much of one it really is, as these lights only show where we can draw line of sight to, where they float endlessly across the map's surface. We don't actually get much of an idea of what it's like to live in the Cursed Apple. I mean, most of our experience is spent fighting over the streets that have been evacuated for the ritual. So getting a sense that people are living real lives in between our matches is actually kind of a really cute feeling. Something else that stands out are these low poly buildings that float along the edges of this map. From where we normally stand, they serve as a way to give the impression of more depth to the city, their lack of detail deliberate as it draws your eye to the foreground. Approaching them though feels very unnatural. They become these sort of alien spaceships gathered for the coming battle of gods, ancient monoliths of power, silently observing the trials of mortals. Or at least, that's what my head says. It's not actually that deep. Or is it? Well, it turns out that... You probably saw this coming given how much I talked about it before, but the exterior of the Hideout is also completely walkable. Yes, literally everything here has collision. You might want to buy a few items before coming out here, but it's perfectly possible to navigate the entire area. There is a kill box that will get you eventually, but you'd be surprised how far you have to go. From certain angles, it's possible to place a door on the exterior and one going into the Hideout so you can teleport back inside without returning to no-clip. Is this useful information to have? Are you ever going to be no-clipping outside of the Hideout and then suddenly not able to use the console and have to use the door to get in? No, but it's pretty cool. But what if I told you this entire time we've not been alone? Out there, in the background, was a man, watching, waiting, silently biding his time. Forget the Archmother, forget the Hidden King, forget the Doorman. He is the real eldritch horror. He stands sentinel at the foot of the flat iron building, and should we approach, will smite us down. Some brave souls have managed to reach him and lived, but I don't have the stomach, frankly. His untextured, unblinking stare is enough to tell me that I really shouldn't be there. He is yet one more oddity populating this already strange world. Another misplaced piece of a puzzle years in the making, and we would be worse off for his absence. But now it's time to go, for there is so much more to see, and so many more details to look at. Until then, see ya!